The seventh art has always found ways to challenge the audience, provoking unexpected reactions and exploring the limits of imagination. Among the boldest genres, experimental horror holds a peculiar place, filled with works that deviate from traditional narratives and embrace disturbing aesthetics, symbolic imagery, and unsettling atmospheres. Unlike conventional films, these productions do not offer easy answers and often require a keen eye to grasp their hidden meanings. But what makes these films so unsettling and hard to forget? Is it merely their unusual aesthetics, or is there something deeper behind these enigmatic stories? Hello, restless minds. I'm Code, and this is Discover It, where curiosity knows no limits. Subscribe and help the channel grow, because every time you like, comment, or share, you're helping us bring these discoveries to more people. Together, we can create a community where curiosity can change the world. And now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Eraserhead, David Lynch's first feature film, is not just a movie, it is a nightmare captured on film. Released in 1977, the film became a classic of surrealism and psychological horror. With a suffocating industrial aesthetic and a disturbing sound design, Eraserhead places us inside the mind of a man consumed by fear and anxiety. But what is really happening in this claustrophobic and distorted world? The story follows Henry Spencer, a lonely man who lives in a decaying apartment in an industrial city filled with incessant mechanical noises. His vacant stare and hesitant posture already indicate that he is out of place, trapped in an environment that seems to be slowly crushing him. But his life becomes even more chaotic when he discovers that his girlfriend has given birth to a baby, and this child looks nothing like anything we could call human. Henry's baby is a deformed creature with wrinkled skin and perpetually wide eyes. Its endless crying blends with the city's noise, creating an atmosphere of growing despair. Unable to handle the situation, his girlfriend abandons him, leaving Henry alone with the creature. What should be a moment of connection between father and child turns into a relationship of terror and repulsion. But does this baby truly exist, or is it merely a manifestation of Henry's fears? The city around him reflects his anguish. The buildings appear dirty and deteriorated, the hallways are narrow and dimly lit, and the entire environment seems to suffocate the protagonist. There is no moment of silence or rest. The world of Eraserhead does not follow logical rules. It is built on feelings of oppression and paranoia. But does this world truly exist, or is it just a projection of Henry's mind? Amidst all this, the lady in the radiator appears, a bizarre figure who emerges from the heater in Henry's apartment. With an exaggerated smile and an eerily serene gaze, she sings about how in heaven everything is fine. Her angelic face contrasts with the filthy, chaotic environment around her. But what does she represent? A promise of relief for Henry, or just another illusion created by his exhausted mind? The film becomes increasingly surreal as Henry plunges deeper into his own alienation. The sequence in which his head detaches from his body and is turned into pencil erasers seems straight out of a fever dream. This seemingly absurd scene may symbolize his complete loss of identity. But is this transformation a fate imposed on him, or something he has always been? The soundtrack of Eraserhead is one of the keys to its unique atmosphere. The constant noise of machines, grinding metal, and distorted sounds creates an environment where silence is never complete. This industrial soundscape is so present that it almost becomes a character itself, reinforcing the idea that Henry cannot escape the crushing reality around him. David Lynch has never explained the exact meaning of the film, preferring to let each viewer draw their own conclusions. Many see Eraserhead as an allegory for the fears of fatherhood and the anxiety of taking on responsibilities. Others interpret it as a critique of the dehumanizing urban environment. But is the true horror of the film not precisely an impossibility of finding a single answer? In the end, Henry faces his fate in an ambiguous way. Reality dissolves into a final sequence as confusing as the rest of the narrative, and when the screen goes dark, Eraserhead remains alive in the viewer's mind, like a bad dream from which it is impossible to wake. In the fashion world, beauty is not just a quality, it is a currency of incalculable value. The Neon Demon, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn in 2016, explores this universe with a cruel and surreal gaze, where youth becomes a commodity so coveted that it may cost lives. Visually stunning, the film combines psychological horror and disturbing symbolism to tell a story in which the obsession with aesthetics reaches its most extreme point. But is there something supernatural behind this deadly fascination? The story follows Jessie, a 16-year-old girl who moves to Los Angeles to become a model. Her natural beauty and angelic appearance immediately make her stand out, attracting the attention of photographers and agents. But they also spark envy among veteran models who see her as a threat. Initially naive, Jessie soon begins to realize the power her image holds over others. But does this power come without consequences? As Jessie rises in her career, the behavior of those around her becomes increasingly strange. Admiration turns into desire, and desire into obsession. Gigi and Sarah, more experienced models, look at her with a mix of fascination and resentment. But what exactly do they want? To be like Jessie, or to possess something she has that they never will? The film's visual style reinforces its surreal atmosphere. Neon tones saturate every scene, creating a sense of artificiality that feels almost dreamlike. The fashion shows and photo shoots are filmed as if they were rituals, where the models take on an almost divine role. The hypnotic electronic soundtrack enhances this sensation, immersing the viewer in a world where aesthetics overshadow any trace of humanity. But does all this beauty hide something monstrous underneath? Jessie's transformation happens subtly. At first, she is shy and hesitant, but as she realizes her impact on others, she begins to become more confident, and perhaps even arrogant. But is this change merely a natural consequence of her success, or is something deeper happening within her? In this world, youth and beauty are not just admired, they are almost a supernatural force. As the film progresses, it plunges into absolute horror. The envy of the veteran models turns into a literal desire to consume Jessie, leading to a series of disturbing events that completely alter the tone of the story. The idea of devouring beauty becomes something much more than symbolic. But is this merely a metaphor for the fashion industry, or is the film telling us something darker about human nature itself? The obsession with perfection has already driven people to unimaginable extremes. Plastic surgeries, extreme diets, physical and psychological sacrifices, all in the name of eternal youth. But in the Neon Demon, this pursuit of beauty is not just a whim. It is a primordial instinct, something as brutal as the need to hunt to survive. What happens when aesthetics become an obsession so powerful that it erases any moral limits? The film's ending leaves more questions than answers. Who was Jessie really? Just an ordinary girl with a perfect face? Or something much greater and more enigmatic? Was she a victim or in some way also a predator? The film never provides a singular truth, only images and sensations that continue to haunt the viewer long after the screen goes dark. The Neon Demon is not just a critique of the fashion industry, but a brutal depiction of humanity's obsession with youth and power. Beauty can be a gift, but it can also be a death sentence. Among all experimental horror and science fiction films, Under the Skin, directed by Jonathan Glazer in 2013, stands out as one of the most enigmatic and hypnotic experiences in modern cinema. Starring Scarlett Johansson, the film presents a cold and minimalist narrative where every scene seems to conceal something that is never fully revealed. With no grand explanations, no expository dialogue, Under the Skin immerses the viewer in an atmosphere of mystery and discomfort, leading to an inevitable question. What is really happening? The story follows a nameless woman, played by Johansson, who roams the streets of Scotland driving a van. She observes the men around her carefully, engaging them in seductive conversations and selecting her victims with surgical precision. But what exactly is she looking for? The film quickly suggests that this woman is not human. Her cold demeanor, lack of expression, and the methodical way she lures lonely men into her vehicle point to something far stranger than a simple seduction game. The process of capturing the victims is one of the film's most iconic sequences. Every time a man enters the van, he is led into a dark, undefined space where he slowly walks toward the woman. The environment is an absolute void, no walls, no reference points. The men, entranced by her presence, walk forward without realizing that the floor beneath them is turning liquid until they completely sink. There is no struggle, no visible despair, just a silent disappearance. But what happens to them afterward? The film's aesthetic reinforces the sense of alienation. The bustling streets of Scotland contrast with the moments of absolute emptiness in the capture scenes. The minimalist soundtrack and distorted sound effects make everything feel like a parallel reality, where the rules are different and time drags on in a strange way. Every detail is meticulously crafted to generate a constant sense of unease. But Under the Skin is not just about this hunting routine. Gradually, the protagonist seems to begin changing. She encounters situations that challenge her understanding, such as when she tries to seduce one of her victims and realizes that something inside her is not functioning as it should. In one particularly striking scene, she stares at her own reflection for a long time, as if trying to understand what she sees. Could something human be awakening within her? This conflict intensifies when the protagonist meets a man with facial deformities. Unlike her previous victims, this man is neither attractive nor confident. He hesitates, speaks timidly, and seems completely disconnected from the world around him. Yet, instead of simply capturing him as she did with the others, she hesitates. For the first time, we see something resembling empathy in her expression. But what does this mean? A glitch in her program or a true awakening? From this point on, the narrative takes an unexpected turn. The alien begins to stray from her initial mission and explore the human world in a different way. But change comes at a cost. She is no longer just a hunter, she can also be hunted. The roles are reversed, and the vulnerability she begins to feel makes her a target. Is this the ultimate irony? The creature that once saw humans as prey now becomes a victim of human brutality? Under the Skin does not concern itself with providing easy answers. Much of what happens in the film remains a mystery, and details about the protagonist's origin or purpose are never explained. All we have are images and suggestions, clues scattered throughout the narrative that leave room for countless interpretations. What does this story really mean? A horror tale about an alien entity? A metaphor for the female condition in a world dominated by male desire? Or perhaps a reflection on loneliness and the search for identity? Scarlett Johansson delivers a minimalist yet hypnotic performance. Her initial coldness contrasts with the film's final moments, where her character experiences something she never had before: fear. And when the truth about her appearance is finally revealed, the impact is as profound as the sense of inevitability. The film does not conclude in a traditional way, but rather with a scene that lingers in the viewer's mind long after the credits roll. With its unique approach and unsettling aesthetic, Under the Skin has cemented itself as one of the most thought-provoking films in contemporary cinema. Its horror does not come from jump scares, but from its atmosphere, its lack of answers, and the growing discomfort that builds with each scene. But does this film simply tell a story about an entity observing humans, or does it ultimately make us question what it truly means to be human? Folk horror has always explored humanity's primal fears: isolation, the untamed forces of nature, and the presence of the unknown. Hagazusa, directed by Lucas Fiegelfeld in 2017, delves deep into these themes, delivering a film that not only frightens, but also disturbs in a silent and profound way. Set in the 15th century in a remote village in the Austrian Alps, the film follows the story of Albrun, a young woman raised in isolation who carries a dark past. But was this isolation a choice or a curse imposed upon her from birth? Albrun's childhood is marked by fear from the very beginning. Her mother, a woman who lives away from the village, is seen by the townspeople as a witch. The whispers, distrustful glances, and growing hostility of the community are a part of the girl's reality from an early age. The harsh winter envelopes everything in a constant mist, and the forest surrounding her home seems to conceal something that never fully reveals itself. Her mother's fear is evident, but does she fear something external or something she already carries within her? When Albrun's mother falls ill, the atmosphere in their home becomes suffocating. She murmurs incoherent words, her eyes lost in darkness, and her presence grows increasingly terrifying. Albrun, still a child, watches everything in silence, unable to fully understand what is happening. But when her mother finally succumbs to madness and death, the true horror begins. What happens to a child who grows up with nothing but shadows for company? The film moves forward in time, showing Albrun as an adult, now living alone in the mountains. The village's hostility is now directed at her. The villagers have not forgotten the past and treat her with disdain and fear. The isolation, once a consequence of her mother's life, has now become an essential part of her own existence. But is Albrun truly alone, or has her mother's presence never completely left her? The protagonist's relationship with the surrounding nature is ambiguous. The forest that encloses her can be both a refuge and a threat. The natural elements become characters in their own right. The wind howling like a lament, the darkness of the night seeming to conceal secrets that will never be explained. In a world where the supernatural blends with reality, how far can isolation drive someone to madness? As the film progresses, Albrun begins to experience strange occurrences, sounds that should not be there, disturbing visions, and an increasing sense that something is watching her. But what exactly haunts her? Is it her mother's spirit, the hatred of the village, or her own mind, twisted by years of isolation and abuse? The answer is never clearly given, and it is this ambiguity that makes Hagazusa so compelling. The film's violence is not explicit but psychological. There are no monsters or sudden scares. Instead, the narrative unfolds slowly, plunging deeper and deeper into the protagonist's inner horror. Her strange rituals, her vacant gaze, and the way her sanity unravels create a growing discomfort for the viewer. Is Albrun a victim or the true threat? The cinematography of Hagazusa is breathtaking. Every frame feels like a painting, with compositions carefully planned to emphasize the contrast between natural beauty and human decay. The dim lighting, cold tones, and constant mist reinforce the atmosphere of isolation and despair. Silence also plays a crucial role, making every sound, a whisper, a crack in the forest, even more unsettling. The minimalist soundtrack adds to the feeling of unease, with drawn-out notes and distant echoes. The film's music serves as a harbinger of the inevitable. Nothing in Hagazusa suggests relief or comfort. From the start, there is an invisible weight on the protagonist, something pulling her toward a fate that may have been sealed before she was even born. But is this fate real or merely a prophecy fulfilled because everyone believed in it? Albrun's descent into madness reaches a point of no return when she fully embraces what she was always accused of being, a witch. But what does it mean to be a witch in a world where simply being different is enough to condemn someone? The film does not answer directly, but makes it clear that regardless of her nature, Albrun never had a choice. Hagazusa is a study of fear, solitude, and the weight of collective belief. Unlike conventional horror films, it does not offer explanations or dramatic twists. Instead, it leaves the viewer trapped in the same suffocating darkness that engulfs its protagonist. If there's a film capable of testing the limits of human perception, that film is Begotten. Forget traditional storytelling, well-defined characters, and explanatory dialogues. Here, everything is driven by visuals and a suffocating atmosphere, creating an experience that challenges any viewer. Released in 1991 and directed by Elias Murridge, Begotten is a true cinematic enigma. With its grainy black and white aesthetic, The film feels like a forbidden artifact, something found in an abandoned basement that perhaps should never have been watched. But what exactly is this work trying to show us? The first scene makes it clear that this is not an ordinary film. A hooded figure, identified as God, writhes in agony within a dark and empty space. His movements are erratic, as if he were trapped within his own body. Suddenly, an act of self-mutilation occurs, and from it, a new entity emerges, Mother Earth. She appears in a ritualistic manner, as if destruction were the true beginning of creation. There are no dialogues, no explanations, only the silent brutality of the scene. But is this dark vision of creation merely a visual delirium, or does it hide something deeper? From this moment on, the journey becomes increasingly uncomfortable. Mother Earth carries new life within her, and amid the darkness, she gives birth to a fragile and helpless creature. This figure, which many interpret as a representation of humanity, crawls through the desolate environment without direction, like a being thrown into the world without any control over its own fate. The imagery is raw, almost primitive, evoking a sense of unease. Who or what is observing this scene? And why does everything seem to be guided by an obscure purpose? The space surrounding this defenseless being is oppressive, filled with shadows and distorted textures. Everything around it seems threatening, but the real horror does not lie in the settings or the creatures that appear. It lies in the complete absence of hope. Unlike conventional films, where the viewer finds a narrative thread to hold on to, Begotten offers only emptiness and suffering. The experience is almost like watching an ancient ritual unfold without understanding its rules. Are we witnessing an inevitable cycle of birth, suffering, and death? Soon, masked and spectral figures enter the scene. They do not speak, but their gestures are cold and calculated. Without any warning, they subject the newborn creature to acts of violence, as if it were part of a ritual that has been repeated for centuries. There is no resistance, no escape. The most terrifying part is that we do not know who these figures are or where they come from. They simply exist, fulfilling a role that seems predestined. But what do they represent? Divine forces? Entities punishing creation? Or are they merely the personification of the inherent cruelty of existence? The absence of color and the film's grainy texture make each frame look like an ancient painting damaged by time. The extreme contrasts between light and shadow create images that could very well belong in forbidden books of occult symbolism. Begotten does not merely present disturbing scenes. It makes the viewer feel as though they are violating something by watching it, as if it were a film that should never have been made. But why? What is so wrong about looking directly at this apocalyptic vision? Elias Murridge, the director, revealed that he conceived the film after a near-death experience. He wanted to visually translate something that cannot be put into words. The result is a film that does not offer easy explanations and can mean different things to each viewer. For some, it is a representation of the creation of the universe. For others, a metaphor for suffering and rebirth. But what if the truth is even more terrifying? What if Begotten is not just a symbolic film, but a reflection of something that actually happens on a plane beyond our comprehension? The discomfort does not come solely from what is shown on screen, but from what remains implied. The feeling that we are witnessing something forbidden, something that should never have been recorded. As if someone had managed to capture on film an event that should remain unknown to humanity. And with each new scene, this sensation intensifies. The silence is deafening. The distorted sounds seem to whisper hidden truths, and the darkness engulfs every trace of humanity. What happens if we stare into this abyss for too long? Even without uttering a single word, Begotten screams its intentions to those willing to listen. The film does not provide answers, but raises unsettling questions for the viewer. After all, what does it mean to exist? Does creation always have to be painful? Or are we merely prisoners of an eternal cycle of birth and destruction, condemned to repeat this journey indefinitely? Over the years, Begotten has become a cult film, both admired and feared. Few works manage to elicit such a visceral reaction without using jump scares or explicit graphic violence. Here, the horror does not stem from what is shown but from what is felt. It is a terror that operates directly on the mind, leaving marks that linger long after the screen goes dark. Among all the works of filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky, Santa Sangre is perhaps one of the most disturbing and hypnotic. Released in 1989, the film is a dive into symbolism, surrealism, and psychological horror, exploring themes such as trauma, religiosity, and madness. The narrative follows Phoenix, a young man raised in a circus whose childhood was marked by traumatic events that continue to haunt his adult life. But Santa Sangre is not just a story about a man trying to escape his past. It is a labyrinth of images and metaphors that defy logic and make us question the protagonist's very sanity. Phoenix's childhood is anything but ordinary. Raised in a circus, he grows up surrounded by eccentric figures and an environment where reality and imagination constantly blend. His father is a knife thrower, a man with a violent and unstable temperament. His mother, a devout and obsessive woman, leads a bizarre religious cult dedicated to a saint without arms, a symbol of martyrdom and sacrifice. But to what extent is this devotion merely faith and not a symptom of something far darker? The tragedy that defines Phoenix's life occurs when he is still a child. In a fit of rage and jealousy, his father commits an act of extreme violence against his mother and then takes his own life. The scene, loaded with symbolism and horror, is the breaking point that marks the protagonist's fate. From that moment on, his mind fragments, and the line between past and present, reality and hallucination, becomes increasingly blurred. But could this trauma ever be forgotten, or was he always destined to relive it? The film moves forward in time, and now we see Phoenix as an adult, confined to a psychiatric hospital. He does not speak, does not react, and seems completely lost within his own mind. But when the past returns to claim him, he is forced to confront the demons that never truly abandoned him. His mother resurfaces in his life, and with her, new reality, one in which Phoenix has no control over his own actions. The relationship between mother and son becomes the central axis of the film. Phoenix's mother, now without arms, forces him to be her hands. In a macabre game of psychological domination, he carries out every action she commands as if he were a puppet moved by invisible strings. But to what extent is this submission imposed, and to what extent does he desire himself? Their dependency becomes increasingly toxic, driving Phoenix to commit unthinkable acts without question. Visually, Santa Sangre is a surreal spectacle. Each scene appears to have been crafted as a living painting filled with vibrant colors and symbolic imagery. The spilled blood blends with the circus aesthetic, creating a nightmare atmosphere where nothing is what it seems. Religious elements are also ever present, reinforcing the idea of sacrifice and redemption. But does this quest for redemption truly exist, or is it merely an illusion constructed to justify violence? The film's murder scenes are staged theatrically, almost as artistic performances. Phoenix, dominated by his mother's will, eliminates those who pose a threat to her. But what is really happening? Is it all a manifestation of his own madness, or is his mother's presence real? Jodorowsky's storytelling prevents the viewer from reaching a definitive answer. Amid this spiral of madness, there is a thread of hope. The memory of a girl from the circus, Alma, resurfaces in Phoenix's mind. Unlike everything around him, Alma represents something pure and true, a past where he had not yet been consumed by his mother's obsession. But does he still have the strength to escape this cycle, or has he already been completely overtaken by her influence? The film's final sequence is as ambiguous as the rest of the narrative. Phoenix confronts his own fate in a battle that is both physical and psychological. The viewer is left questioning what really happened. Has he finally freed himself, or has he only sunk further into his madness? As with all of Jodorowsky's films, there is no single correct interpretation. Only images that linger in the mind, waiting to be deciphered. With Santa Sangre, Alejandro Jodorowsky delivers a film that masterfully blends horror, drama, and surrealism. The movie not only explores the horrors of the human mind, but also makes us reflect on how the past can imprison us. Experimental horror is not meant to comfort or offer easy answers. It challenges, disturbs, and often leaves the viewer trapped in a maze of interpretations. Begotten drags us into a primitive nightmare about creation and destruction. Eraserhead transforms the mundane into a spiral of anxiety and delirium. The Neon Demon exposes the obsession with youth and beauty in its most brutal form. Under the Skin deconstructs humanity through the eyes of a being that does not belong to this world. Hagazusa plunges into solitude and the weight of belief, while Santa Sangre makes us question whether we can escape the traumas that shape us. Each of these films carries a different kind of horror, one that does not hide in monsters or cheap scares but seeps slowly into the mind and remains there. If you enjoyed this journey of discoveries, don't forget to leave a like, share with friends, and comment below on what stood out the most to you. Maybe others will relate, and together, we can create a great discussion. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more content where curiosity knows no limits.